Alright, so welcome back to another comparison. This time we're going to be taking a look at the Philips Fidelio X2HRs and comparing them to the newbie that received quite a lot of hype a few months ago, the Sennheiser HD560S. And no, it does not come with this wool headband. I went ahead and bought one and purchased it for my own unit. Now, before I say another word, allow me to present a synopsis of what each headphone sounds like when compared to each other with nothing but B-roll footage and royalty-free music. Let's get into it. So let's go ahead and start off with the content. This one's pretty straightforward. The Fidelios come with a 3.5 to 3.5 millimeter tip ring sleeve braided cable, while the HD560S come with a twist lock 2.5 millimeter tip ring sleeve to 4th inch tip ring sleeve cable. Each comes with an adapter, but the Fidelios feature a 3.5 millimeter to 4th inch adapter, while the 560S, mind you, come with a 4th inch to 3.5 millimeter adapter. Now, I've said it before, but I really prefer the traditional small to large adapter, since the opposite definitely can be prone to breaking far more easily. The Fidelios also come with a branded cable clip for cable management purposes. A pretty nice little addition. I've personally never really gotten around to using it. I just let the extra cable hang, but you're more than welcome to use it if you want to. Now let's talk about the build quality. There's a huge difference here. Putting comfort aside, the Fidelios knocked the HD560S out of the water. Now, the Fidelios are mostly made of metal, while the HD560S are mostly made out of plastic. The Fidelios are an example of premium build quality at a budget, no doubt. Now, the headband features a suspension strap mechanism, so if you plan on hanging these on a headphone stand, I highly advise you to hang it from the upper portion to prevent the tension from loosening up over time. Now, the 560S aren't exactly a flimsy headphone. The type of plastic used feels right down the middle. Acceptable for this price point, but definitely at the bottom of the list. These headphones have a simple headband with padding where the top of your head touches it right there. These have a similar dip right in the middle, as similar to the HD650s. As you can see, there's padding right here, but there's a dip right in the middle. Now, their cables are equally as kinky, but the Fidelio's braided cable is a tad more rough and heavy than the 560S's thin and light rubber cable. If I'm going to be bothered by a kinky cable, at least let it be lightweight. Just my 2 cents. Now let's go ahead and jump into comfort. I could save us time and say that the Fidelios beat out the 560S in the comfort department, but that answer is it's not as simple as that. For my head at least, the Fidelios require that you position them a very particular way before they start getting lost on your head, so to speak. If you fail to do this, they just feel heavy and clampy. Now, you'd expect the HD560S to be the more comfortable option since they're made entirely of plastic and the cups are oval shaped, right? Well, you'd be dead wrong, for my head at least. I've explained it before in the standalone review. They apply the majority of the pressure on the upper half of the cuffs, while the lower halves barely form a seal. So what's more is they clamp hard. I mean, it's an absolute nightmare like 80% of the time, and it's mildly adequate the other 10%. Now, with amplification on the THX AAA 789, I run the Fidelios at 10:30 AM on gain 2, and I run the 560S at 11 AM on gain 2. It's a small difference, but it's definitely there. Definitely noticeable. Like, you definitely have to just adjust it a little smidge every time you swap back and forth between the two. So now for the sound portion. Before we begin, as usual, all impressions are without the use of EQ. We will discuss EQ later in the notes and observations portion of this review. Now, with that out of the way, let's begin. Let's begin with the bass section. So I used the bass guitar in Get Lucky by Daft Punk here, and let me tell you, there's actually plenty to love from both sides here. This is probably one of the very few instances where I can say that both headphones are very different, yet both are great. The 560S offers the most neutral of bass guitars. They're very well textured and sit right beside every other instrument. Like there's no recession, no emphasis. It's just As boring as that may sound, it's actually quite an impressive response. It's very tight and professional. Now the Fidelios offer a more puffy bass guitar, but also has great texture to it. It definitely sounds forward, but here's how it differs from the typical V-shaped headphone. Even though it is forward and commanding, it knows when not to overstep, and it manages to coexist peacefully alongside the mids and the treble without overshadowing them. So I use Zealots of Stockholm by Childish Gambino to test out the sub bass and electronic bass all together. At the minute 34 mark, the 560S present a lean but very well textured note that actually has great rumble down below due to the headphone's excellent sub bass extension. Now the Fidelios don't present a damn thing. They smack you with it. When swapping from the 560S to the Fidelios, I felt that rumble with such intensity. Now even though the note is warm and it rumbles like crazy, it never loses its texture or starts to sound limp and muddy. It never overthrows it, you know? It never gets carried away. Now at the 304 minute mark, the 560S present that valley with impressive presence. It is generally flat throughout the way down, but at the lowest point before it disappears, it seems to have a teensy bit of extra forwardness. Like, not enough to say that it's too forward, but I wouldn't call it perfectly flat either. The Fidelios present the bass valley with great intensity right up until the point where it disappears, and then it picks up with that same thunderous rumble. Out of the two, the 560S do have the slightly deeper bass extension, but I'd recommend choosing one over the other based off of their general bass responses, not just based off of which extends deeper, which, by the way, the 560S do by a smidge. Now last of all, I used Helena Beat by Foster the People to test out the timbre of the drums. The 560S present drums in a more lean way, while the Fidelios make drums sound larger and more commanding. No surprises there, I guess. Now we jump into the mids. As a whole, the entire mid section sounds more hyped on the Fidelios than on the 560S. I know. The Fidelios are V-shaped, so your description doesn't sound accurate. Well, I'm just calling it like I see it, okay? Now I used the Postmodern Jukebox cover of Dream On for testing out female vocals and the instruments present in the track. That would be primarily like the violin, the cello, the piano on the left. Yeah, mostly the mid section. Now the 560S sound a bit whack here in my opinion. The entire response sounds quite orderly and formal. The instruments know that it is Morgan James' spotlight, so they remain in the background. That makes sense. But then as the track progresses, she starts getting quite a bit too forward, especially during her louder parts. It's like, whoa, take a step back, please. I can hear you, thank you. Funny thing is, I actually remember the sound of the HD598 closed back when I had them. I didn't review them, this was way before I had my channel. This was like freshman year of college for me. Yeah, I remember they sounded great. Excellent bass, excellent treble, nothing terrible, but they had this elevation in the mids that it wasn't necessarily that it was forward, it was just shouty. It was unbearable, especially in some tracks like Marilyn Manson tracks. But that is a different story for a different day. Now the Fidelios play this part a bit differently. They sound a bit cozier in terms of positioning, not soundstage. The instruments sound closer to each other and surround the vocalist. You got the vocalist right down the middle, and then you've got the rest of the instruments surrounding her. All around her. At stock frequencies, female vocals are actually more enjoyable on the Fidelios than on the 560S. Now the cello sounded ever so slightly more nasal on the Fidelios than on the 560S. However, pizzicato sounded more detailed and articulate on the Fidelios. So it's a pick your poison type of deal. Generally speaking, the midsection just sounds more musical on the Fidelios while sounding somewhat sterile on the HD560S. Now we approach the treble response. The Fidelios possess the more forward treble response, sounding pretty much like a V-shaped headphones treble would sound like. Sibilant, shiny, and janky. Yeah, I don't know if you could tell, but I'm not a fan of V-shaped headphones. And yet, why did I keep this one? Yeah, coming up soon in the EQ section. Now the 560S definitely have the upper hand here. Although their treble response still lies a bit forward from neutral, it has much more control and is far less offensive. For testing out upper percussion and sibilance, I use Cowboys from Hell by Pantera from the Greatest Hits album. On the 560S, cymbals sounded clear and they stand out, but are never offensive or stick out too much. On the Fidelios, those cymbals seem to almost protrude above the rest of the instruments. The S and the TH range definitely sound sibilant here as well. Now as far as air is concerned, I feel that both have the same amount of air up top, but the Fidelios clearly emphasize it more. They make it sound shinier. Now with soundstage and imaging, the soundstage is wider on the Fidelios in terms of the x-axis. It's not a huge difference, but it's definitely significant enough. However, on the y-axis, the 560S sound taller. Like, it's generally how you see the headphones cups, you know, their sizes and their shapes. So the Fidelios sound a little shorter and wider, but the 560S sound a little more narrow, but taller. Now the 560S are good at imaging, there's really nothing to complain about. They present sounds with good detail and separate sounds very well. However, the entire experience transcends into the next level when you put on the Fidelios. It must be due to a combination of their imaging capabilities and their more V-shaped sound. But an example, Core Pride by Overworld. Every sound sounds a bit more discernible and tangible, so to speak. The 560S basically, you know, like, here's your sound, here's your sound, here's your sound, it's over here, it is over there, here you go, on a platter, right? Then you put on the Fidelios, and the Fidelios just, they sound like they want to wow you. You got the guitars doing the left, right, and then the vocals come in with the yeah, and the chorus begins. Now for the notes and observations portion, these are the EQ settings I use with the HD560S. The biggest reason for EQ is to tame that slightly elevated treble ever so slightly. More importantly though, those mids can be an issue that I'd like to see solved. Thankfully, these issues weren't exactly glaringly annoying, just mild gripes that can be dealt with by using EQ. The Fidelios are a tougher nut to crack. Because they are meant to be V-shaped, I wanted to leave these sounding hyped, V-shaped. But I wanted to fix the jaggedness in the treble response. So I think EQ fixes the forwardness enough, but it definitely doesn't come close to neutral. Just keep that in mind. The treble will still be forward, but it will be far more tolerable. And in my opinion, tolerable enough. So to conclude, both of these are excellent headphones, but they appeal to two different demographics. The 560S are for a more professional reference sound. You would use these when mixing because of their linearity and painfully neutral timbre. Now the Fidelios, on the other hand, are for memes. They're for the memes, you know, they're for the fun. It's about enjoying your tunes. These make you feel the boom. So I feel that you're getting a better price to performance ratio with the Fidelios just because of how detailed and well built they are. The 560S, on the other hand, they seem to be about adequate for their price. They're definitely acceptable, definitely not going to regret your purchase, so to speak, but the only thing keeping them in the competition at all is their timbre and their excellent bass extension. So I think you can't go wrong with either of these, but you definitely need to ask yourself what kind of music you plan on listening to and what your purpose for buying the new headphone is. So anyway, that's going to go ahead and do it for me. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, ring the notification bell, leave your comments down below if you have any questions about these, what would I use with them, yada yada. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this helped your purchasing decision, and I will see you in the next one.